Due to the maliciously bureaucratic folks over at YouTube, I'm advised to tell you. This is for harm reduction purposes.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. How you doing? Great. That's absolutely fucking spectacular. I want to tell you the true story of the acid trip that made me crazy. I had been looking for acid for like a month, and I wasn't getting lucky. I was sort of thinking about going to the deep web, but I was kind of paranoid that I was going to end up like having cops watching my mailbox. Plus I was living in a caravan in a hippie commune, and so I didn't have a mailbox. Anyway, I talked to my cousin, my friend, and he told me his friend bought shit off the deep web, so I gave him $200 and said, can you get me as much acid as you can with this and keep the change? A couple of weeks later, getting given like 10 tabs, I was kind of like, damn, it's expensive shit. I didn't buy a drug testing kit for one reason, and I know it's gonna sound fucking pretty stupid, but I was under the impression like, hey man, it's cool. The deep web drug shop works kind of like eBay. So if like the acid that's getting bought only has like 3 stars or kaleidoscopes or whatever they're using, it's probably not some bomb-ass shit, you know? Then I guess there is the possibility that all the fucking hippies that are buying it off the deep web are giving it 5 stars so they can manifest a good trip or some shit like that. Treat the acid right and it'll treat you right. I ended up getting the shit, and it was so strong that I was getting heavy visuals off a third. I was using it throughout the month, and then I only had 2 tabs left when I was like to Eve, hey, we've never candy flipped.
Candy flipping, mixing LSD and MDMA.
We should do that today. So we took a day off, went down to the creek, had a half a cap and half a tab of this acid, and by the time we got back to the car, shit was getting fucking wicked awesome. Holy egads, man. Fuck me, dead. We started tripping, and we walked up out of the creek to my ute, and I laid in the back of the ute while Eve drove through the hippie commune that we were at. That was pretty fucking cool. By the time we stopped and got out, we looked up and we were like, what the fuck? Rainbow oceans were bouncing off of the sky. We drove up to this mountain and had a picnic. Obviously, instead of food, we had cigarettes. The fucking trees were just going pew, pew, pew. Little rainbow colored lights bouncing off of each leaf. Now, this is where I did the stupidest thing I've ever done. We went down to the creek by the bamboo forest, and Eve was sitting there by the creek just fucking absolutely gobsmacked by the trip we were having. And like a fucking imbecile, I reached down like fucking God in the creation of Adam with the other half a tab on the tip of my finger. Hey Eve, here's the other half a tab. She was like, are you fucking serious? Do you not see this shit? And I was like, yeah, but hear me out. I know right now that the world seems to be dissolving into a polychromatic blizzard of wow. But, hear me out. If you're seeing what you're seeing right now, but you're still feeling pretty good in the head, like, you know, you're still thinking straight, right? She's like, yeah, kinda. It's like, well, if we take the other half a tab, imagine how fucking crazy the visuals would get then, and we'd still be able to handle our shit. This is a perfect opportunity. Maybe it's the MDMA helping us out with this, who knows, but let's give it a go. I eventually convinced Eve with a combination of my boyish charm and the susceptibility to persuasion that often comes as a side effect of psychedelics.
That was some fucking dumb shit.
Anyway, by the time I convinced her to take the other half of the tab, and we sat by the creek for a little while, and then we walked back up to the trailer, that's when shit started getting pretty fucking crazy, okay? The grass was turning into like a 3-dimensional holographic fucking thing, like it wasn't even real. Except for when you touched it, but then it would kind of just go... Mountains off in the distance were shooting very quickly right in my face, and then shooting way back out. And I was like, oh fuck. Eve and I both agreed that our peripheral vision was so distorted that as our limbs came into our field of vision, they would just be contorting and twisting and fucking warping in on themselves. And we could almost hear the crackling of our bones as they sort of moved in. Anyway, we tried to block that out pretty quick. We went inside, and I'm not a very spiritual guy, but I can honestly assure you that your ancestors can communicate fucking symbols and images through the psychedelic experience and plant them on the fucking walls. Because I was seeing like Aztec fucking shit all up the walls. Anyway, we decided to just go inside and lay down. And I watched Eve walk up to the edge of the bed, and her body just vanished, but her head fell off onto the bed and rolled up the blanket and then stopped rolling, perched up against a pillow. And that was... I was pretty certain that happened at the time. And the psychedelic tapestries that filled the caravan became these three-dimensional oceans of different textures.
Now this is where it was starting to get a little bit scary.
I started getting super overwhelmed and I heard this like fucking beehive in the back of my head going. So I was like, oh fuck, what do I do? And then I sparked a thought from like, before I had my first psychedelic experience when I was Googling the shit out of LSD. Oranges. And I was like, fuck, we've got oranges. And I was like, Eve, you want some orange? She was like, yeah, get some orange. Yep, let's do that, yep. So I went outside and it was getting dark and I was fucking gobsmacked by the fact it was getting dark. I was like, what the fuck? If you've ever had a psychedelic experience and it starts to get dark, it's kind of this weird thing. Transitions, like, very contrasting. I step outside and try to step cautiously over the gigantic canyons between each concrete paver till I get to the fridge, get a couple of oranges out and a plate and a knife and bring them inside. And as soon as I cut into the orange, blood just started pouring all over my hands and all through the plate. And I was like, what the fuck? Did I just cut my fucking hand off? Then I remembered it was a blood orange. So, but this was probably the trigger of me starting to have a bad trip. I started getting very concerned that if I touched the wooden table that the oranges were on, that I would incorporate into it and doctors would have to come and saw me out of the table and take me back to the mental ward. Oh yes, I've had a few little holidays in psychiatric wards. Now before you try to make the connection of psychedelic drugs in the psychiatric ward, please note that the times that I was going to the mental ward, I had never had a psychedelic before. In fact, I've never had any hardcore illicit drugs other than marijuana before. In fact, looking back now, had I had psychedelics prior to ever going there, I probably would have never gone there. But I digress. I had a full flash forward that felt like it went for like a month of me being back in the psychiatric ward, but I was going through a state of psychosis, forgetting who I was. I was there day after day after day after day until it was only like 2 seconds. That's when the fear really hit me. According to Eve, I went pale-faced and walked over to her and said, Eve, something's not right. She was like, what do you mean? Now, a complete loss of ego led to Eve following me around while I was running to the neighbors' houses, asking for them to help me. And every time I rocked up at somebody else's house, like I ran across the street and went over to a friend of mine's house and was like, hey man, just not really having a good time. I think I might have had a little bit too much acid. He gave me a beer and then showed me photos of these gardens he was doing. And I was like, man, you've left the screensaver on, it's not photos. He's like, no, that's a photo of a garden. And I was like, what the fuck? Because it was just going with colors and shit. And then he took me through the secret garden, drank a little bit of beer, started feeling a little bit less like, holy fucking shit, I'm never gonna be myself again. Then we went over back across the street to our next door neighbor's house and tried to talk to them for a while. And so it was like, help us. Then we went back to the caravan and Eve started freaking out. And so we were both fucking laying there in the bed, holding each other's fucking arms like we were on a roller coaster, going up and down these waves of unbelievably severe anxiety. Everything started just going absolutely fucking mental, and Eve and I both thought to ourselves, holy fuck, what have we done? We were both becoming the same kind of crazy, and trust me, that's not as romantic as it sounds. And when's it gonna stop? When's it gonna stop? Still very, very visual. Everything was warping the fuck out. Yeah, and then we started picking up vibes from Angus. Angus is the guy who lived in this caravan before us, so we had to drag the fucking mattress out of there and not go back into the caravan. Going through extreme waves of fucking absolute horror and paranoia. And oh my fucking god, we're gonna be normal again. But trying to hold our shit together for each other's sake. Kind of just being like, no, it's totally, it's fine. We just need to like fucking breathe, man. It's all good. We made a chai tea, rolled a cigarette, smoked that shit, drank that shit. And then we did that again. And again and again and again and again and again and again and again. And we just laid there on the foam mattress, piling up this mountain of used tea bags that was like fucking this big, and picking out our old cigarettes out of the ashtray so we could use the filters to re-roll another cigarette. I had this neon Jack Daniels clock, and it felt like I was just watching the minute hand, just going like this. And after a long enough fucking period of time, light started peering through. Eve and I had been talking about like anything we could about our childhood that we could remember to try to regain our fucking egos and remember who we were. we couldn't look at each other in the face because they just appeared like a Picasso piece. And we didn't realize, but that would actually last another day and a half. And we were both very concerned that we would never be able to be together because we would never be able to look at each other again. We constantly had these fucking things like, okay, what are you thinking now? And we'd think very arbitrary things. And we were convinced that we could read each other's minds. That was definitely the thing that made us go like, oh my god, what have we done? Like, we finally fucking cracked something in the universe and we're telepathic. Fucking delusional. Maybe, I don't know. Disregard that, but yeah. We kept talking and we kept drinking chai teas and we kept smoking cigarettes with used filters until they were fucking black. And the sun started coming up and we decided we'd try to go for a walk. A gentle stroll up the street. Just know that we were actually capable of leaving this zone that we had spent so many fucking hours. We walked up and I started freaking out, so we came back, tried to eat food. And it wasn't until the next night that we managed to get like half an hour of sleep each. I never thought I'd be able to drive a car again. I definitely didn't think I was ever going to be normal again. I thought I would have to have a carer forever. Now, the residual effects. For the next year and a half, Eve would go into a state of pure severe anxiety anytime she didn't feel fully on the ball. Like if she was low blood sugar even, she'd start freaking out like she was outside of reality. Me, for about 9 months, I had Truman Show syndrome. I was convinced that I was still crazy and that anytime I would leave one person to the next person while I was on my way over there, the first person would be calling up the other person saying, okay, Squeak's on his way over to your place. He's been having a bad time about this. Maybe don't bring this up. See what you can do about da-da-da-da. While I was driving over there, I was thinking about that scenario happening. And every time I'd rock up at other people's places, they'd be like, hey man, how you doing? And I'm like, is this an act? Is this all part of the... Alright. Were you cued to say that thing you just said there? You know, like, I'd go over to my friend Nathan's house and he'd be like, hey man, I got you some beers. And I was like, oh, how'd you know I was having a bad day? He's like, I didn't. And then I was like, okay. And I'd start thinking about how maybe Eve rang Nathan up while I was on my way over there. Was like, hey, he's having a real bad day. Maybe get a 6-pack of beers. Don't talk about this, talk about that instead. And da-da-da-da-da. So I was very, very convinced that I wasn't like the Truman Show as in I was on a TV show and I was entertaining people, but that I was still fucking insane. And that people were cued to not allow me to relapse or whatever. That lasted 9 fucking months. 9 months of me being paranoid about that shit. Eve never took another drug again. She tried, but she freaked out and couldn't take another drug. So it may have changed her for the better if you're an anti-drug fucking person.
So what in the world are we doing here, and what in the world are we doing here, and what in the world are we doing here, and what in the world are we doing here, and where we come from?